Auburn University has had an impact on every election in every jurisdiction in the United States, and I think that's pretty powerful.
The innovations that you see today in elections, in fact, many of them begin in these conversations.
Auburn University has really shaped the field and developed a lot of leadership in that field.
I think it's fair to say that 40 years ago, there was no profession. And after election 2000, really, there was a huge focus on who are these people? What do they do? Do they make mistakes? Where do they come from? Are they political? All of those kinds of things. And how do they learn how to do their jobs? Because the jobs are tremendously different around the country.
Election in turmoil, a presidency in the balance, a nation waits. Who will emerge the winner in the historic Florida recount? We'll get the latest.
Jackie, how were those votes counted?
Do you have an hour? I can explain it. It was pretty complicated.
The 2000 presidential election with President Bush and Vice President Gore. And in that, of course, it didn't end on Election Day, and it went up till about December 17th when the Supreme Court, basically, and looking at the law of Florida, because Florida had the last set of electors that was coming through, basically said this just has to end. There's no way that you can count the votes fairly in Florida in order to make sure that there's no 14th Amendment violation, Equal Protection Clause, so what it's worth, where you have similarly situated people being treated differently. In Florida, you had a bunch of bad votes. You had people that had voted too many times. Okay, maybe I voted for Gore and for Bush and for whomever else. Then you had people that didn't vote clearly, okay, because of the punch card. It didn't quite go all the way through. So you have two sets of bad votes, and all of them were tossed out. Okay, but only one set during the recount was recounted. That was the ones where you couldn't clearly tell how they had voted. So anyway, that was just this huge to-do. What do you do about those who pushed all the way through, pushed partially through? They created this term called the dimple jad, the pregnant jad, where you could see, that they kind of started a little bit, but it didn't go the rest of the way. Anyway, that created just a tremendous amount of media scrutiny after the 2000 election.
NBC News is now taking Florida out of Vice President Gore's column and putting it back in the too close to call.
When I arrived at Auburn in 2006, this program was operational, and we were coming off sort of the wave of election 2000. It was one of the hottest sort of data sets, if you will, one of the hottest topics in that relationship space. And so that's where I focused my energy, along with my colleague Mitchell Brown and other colleagues in the program. We've written books. We've published first ever books for the field and by and with the field.
We noticed when we were doing classes, 10, 15 years ago with election officials, was that there was this real disconnect between the people who were writing about elections and how they're run and the experience of practitioners. And the practitioners didn't like the research, and the researchers, from our perspective, didn't really work on the questions that were so clearly from the classes important to the field. And so we started trying to really get into praxis research. It's where the journal came from, trying to build a bridge between the practice community and the research community. And you've certainly seen a lot of that in the last decade, and particularly the last 5 years.
We teach classes, for example, in things like public budgeting, program implementation. We do some project management work. We also have been doing a lot recently with things like information security and cybersecurity and so forth, as a way to make sure that the elections data that we collect and tabulate that the data are secure and that they're treated respectfully and managed properly.
My main facets of research is in political parties and party conflict, which used to be pretty divorced from election administration and election research, but the intersection of those things has gotten bigger and bigger over time. So a lot of the conversations I get to facilitate in the training program are about how administrators get to understand not just doing their jobs well, but also like it's really helpful to be able to have those conversations that remind them that like it's not just another job. It's a job that needs to be done well. It's a job that has a lot of rules, but it's also a job, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, that has a ton of politics around it, and helping them sort of see the politics that exists and have a framework for working through that has been, I like to think, helpful as a way to orient them to the sort of the larger environment around the places in which they do their jobs.
I approach it as they are the experts, and I've tried to make and facilitate conditions where they can problem solve and exchange ideas, exchange best practices, because the answers that for the questions they have are going to come from one another. And if I can facilitate an atmosphere where those kinds of answers can bubble up or can thrive, then I've done my job.
I would definitely say that the work our faculty do contributes to more efficient and more effective election operations. The best ideas are in the space that we're working in.
Election administrators know that when they come to Auburn and they're dealing with Auburn faculty, that they are getting some of the best training in the world.
There's probably not an election jurisdiction in the United States that's not been touched by this program. And so the flip side of that is saying that Auburn University has had an impact on every election in every jurisdiction in the United States, and I think that's pretty powerful. When you think about what does outreach do, it helps an external audience, and when you think about the breadth of impact, I'm not sure there's much else that the university does that's broader and more impactful than what the elections program and the training that we do does.